Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 70 brawlers in the game, all the way from the very worst, all the way up to the very best. So going from F tier up into the S tier. So doing it a little bit different because, of course, this is midway through the season. We're actually like a week away from the updates. So just doing it because now there's 70 brawlers in the game and there's been some recent balance changes. So we're starting off with the F tier then. So as you can see on the screen, these are going to be the F tier brawlers. So these are brawlers that literally have a 0% pick rate in competitive. There might be the very rare occasion where you can pull out one of these brawlers, you know, for example, maybe an egg goal when it comes down to hot potato or pit stop. More often than not, he is actually banned though because he's a fantastic last pick. But outside of those few rare scenarios in Heist, he isn't really that good whatsoever. Gale recently received a buff as well to his HP, but still that hasn't really leapfrogged him too much in the meta. Still so many better tank counters out there, and Shelly's actually still pretty good, so Gale doesn't really fulfill that role, which Shelly still already thrives in. Mandy's pretty decent when it comes down to bounty and knockout on ladder, but still it's still so easy to overwhelm a Mandy, and if she misses one super, she's completely useless. Byron gets overwhelmed so easily, and especially since he doesn't charge his super too quickly, he's too squishy as well, gets overrun so easily. Colt, of course, with unbreakable walls, hasn't been the best for a very long time. He's decent on ladder when it comes down to Heist, but still you'd rather just go a lot of different brawlers in competitive and so hard to land shots with. Jackie recently received a buff to her gadget, which allows her to get to their opponents a lot quicker. She's pretty underrated on some maps, but still lacks the range and is still better tanks out there. Mortis, there's just so many Mortis counters at the moment, so many gadgets and supers that can knock him back. He really does struggle in this meta, and of course Frank and Hank are literally useless. It's so hard to use these brawlers. There's just no place for them whatsoever, and they have to be the bottom two brawlers in the game. So now moving on to the D tier, starting off with Fang. So Fang, a lot of you guys are going to say that Fang's underrated, which I guess he is in the right setting. He can be pretty good, but in competitive he pretty much has a 0% pick rate. There's hardly any use for him. He may be good as a last pick in some rare scenarios, but still there's so many different brawlers in the game that can just swap gadget and counter him pretty easily. So definitely Fang needs a little bit of love. Leon, I thought, especially since they changed the way vision gear works, I thought Leon was going to leapfrog into like one of the best brawlers in the game, but I feel like he really lacks the damage right now. So many brawlers can still counter him out, so again, he's not being picked whatsoever in competitive. Chester is the same as well. I feel like he's not F tier at the moment because there's a lot of tanks, especially since the buff to Doug and Rosa, so he can at least get a lot of value against tanks. But outside of that, he's not really the best and too RNG based. Doug recently received a buff which has helped him a little bit when it comes down to ladder, but I feel like you need a really specific composition for Doug to work out. I really like the buff to his super, being able to revive the full amount, but still I feel like he's too predictable when he does respawn from that super. And I think again he only really pairs well with brawlers like Rosa, for example, and Poco. Buster, he is underrated in some scenarios, but still he really does lack for damage a lot of the time. Can be a decent counter to a meta brawler like Tara, but it does get overran so easily a lot of the time. Bull recently received a buff to his supercharge rate and his damage. That has helped him out in the Heist meta. He's starting to see him a little bit in pit stop, but still outside of that, I don't think he's that great whatsoever. BB as well really needs some love. She's literally never used outside of Heist as well, only really good on pit stop and hot potato, where you can get some really good value out of her super. Other than that, there's just so many brawlers that can just knock her back and keep distance. She has very limited range. And then of course Janet used to be one of the best brawlers in the game, recently nerfed her and just absolutely killed her. She's only really good in a few rare scenarios, maybe on double swoosh or some other really bushy maps like Infinite Doom, but outside of that, she's so easy to overwhelm. Jumping into the C tier, starting off with Sandy. So Sandy is starting to improve a little bit in the meta, mainly because Tara is such a dominant brawler and Sandy is the best counter. But not only that, there's a little bit more value with Sandy because at least in a tanky meta he can get super. Before in previous metas he could never get super. Then Meg, of course, Meg used to be one of the best brawlers in the game, recently receiving quite a few nerfs, and I would even go to say she was a D tier brawler, but recently in ESL she's a little bit underrated, being used in a few different scenarios, but still more often than not she's countered pretty easily, and I would personally put her towards a D tier, but data states C tier. Penny, I think Penny has completely fallen off at the moment. Probably could even be close to the D tier. I don't see much use case for Penny at the moment. Can be underrated in some scenarios, maybe on the hot zone where of course her turret can get a lot of value, but I just think so many brawlers can overwhelm her at the moment, and I really struggle to get value out of her. Rico at the moment is pretty underrated, mainly because of its multiple launcher. I think it's actually the better gadget now. I use it pretty much everywhere, and I'm a Rico main. He's really strong in the heist meta, especially on pit stop, because that gadget can get so much damage, and now he's actually not countered by tanks. Typically Rico would do okay against them, but any type of assassin would destroy him, but now multiple launcher allows him to counter his counters, so it's actually pretty decent. Piper, it's a little bit of a weird one. Every now and then she can be pretty underrated in a few scenarios, but it really requires a good Piper with good aim to pop off. If you miss a couple of shots, she's just so hard to use, definitely needs a little bit of love. Jesse's starting to really get better in the meta because she's a good secret counter to a lot of her top brawlers. You think of brawlers like Tara as well, she's really good at countering her, and just overall she's been used in a lot of different scenarios. Good in hot zone, good as a mid in gem grab, and just decent across the board. Maisie, I think in different regions, especially in East Asia, I think Saitampo, one of the best players in the game, thinks Maisie's a top 5 brawler in the game. But within NA and EU, Maisie just doesn't really get the value. In the right setting, a good player can get a lot of good value out of Maisie, but you need to play a perfect game. But she can be dangerous, but for now, I think C tier is pretty fair. Buzz, I don't think got picked or banned at all in ESL recently, so just going to show that pros don't really value Buzz at the moment, but I think he's still pretty underrated. In the right hands, if you're a good Buzz, he can absolutely pop off, but again, there's still a lot of counters to Buzz right now. Lou, I think Lou's starting to really go down in the meta. The only good thing about him is the fact that he can cycle supers with his supercharge gear. Willow, I think Willow is a pretty good pick when it comes down to maps like field goal and pit stop, but still there's just better throwers out there, and only really usable if like Dynamite and Barley are banned out. You also have Max, who is pretty decent across the board, but I would say there's not really a single game mode or scenario she really thrives in. She's just average across the board. 8-bit can be pretty good when a gem carry in harder at mine, for example, and really good as a damage dealer in heist, but outside of that, he gets picked on too easily. Nani can be really strong in bounty and knockout, of course, we're not really seen elsewhere. Bo, sometimes a little bit underrated, but I feel like a lot of the times he does lack the range and people can easily take him down. El Primo's starting to actually go down in the meta a little bit, but I still think he's a fantastic option when it comes down to Brawl, and he's really good at countering his fellow tanks. Surge and Griff recently haven't really been thriving whatsoever. Surge, since the recent gadget nerf, has been terrible, never really used at all in competitive, even when it's multiple tanks, because even them can counter Surge at the moment. And of course, Griff only really good at breaking open the map against specific comp. Now moving on to the B tier, so these are typically brawlers that are really good at countering a lot of different brawlers, so really good late picks, or they're just very versatile across the board. So starting off with Daryl. So Daryl, I think he's probably the best of the bunch in the B tier. He's very underrated so many times in the meta. Fantastic late pick when it comes down to some longer range heist maps like Safe Zone, for example, and then a good first pick in pit stop, and really good as a late pick when it comes down to knockout, can confirm so many kills. Gene, I think is falling down in the meta in the B tier, mainly because his ball doesn't hold as much value anymore. You get a lot of value out of the magic puffs. I think that's the best thing about him at the moment. But you know, brawlers like Mr. P and just so many brawlers that don't really scare or are scared of Gene at the moment, just made him fall down. Sam, I think in the right hands can absolutely be an A tier brawler, but I think it needs the right setting. You need multiple bans for him to work, but again, a great Sam can make so many amazing things happen. I think B tier is pretty fair for him right now. Spike, I think he's a very versatile brawler. You can pretty much use Spike anywhere. I think sometimes, well, most times there's actually a better option, but again, if you're unsure, you can always go to Spike, but still competitive data, he's not really picked too much. I think the only really scenarios used on is pretty much gem grab and maybe heist pit stop. Lola's starting to really get back into the meta recently. She was picked a lot in ESL, which I think she's pretty fair in B tier, but you know, data literally states she's an A tier brawler at the moment. I think the main reason being is because her seal with the kiss stop out recently got a buff, and that is actually really good, especially when you're facing more control comps. It really helps keep you and your teammates alive. Grom is a fantastic option in knockout and bounty, of course, and can be good in the rare scenario and other occasions. You know, like Safe Zone, for example. Dynamite can be so dangerous in the right hands in heist, and can be so strong when it comes down to any map with a lot of unbreakable wolves. He can be incredibly toxic. Colette, really strong in heist, and just with a tank meta, she's starting to get a little bit better, but still, more often than not, was actually a better brawler than her, but just because of how good she is in heist, she has to be around the B tier for sure. Otis, I think Otis is actually pretty overrated a lot of the time. He isn't used too much in competitive, even in a very tank heavy meta. And I just think a lot of the times he doesn't really have the damage to really kill them as well. Amber, I think she's just solid across the board, really good in hot zone, good in heist, and just solid across the board when you're unsure on who to go. And also she's a fantastic counter to a meta brawler like Tara. Cordelius has really fallen off the meta quite a bit just because you can't really cycle the supers the way you could usually, but I think it's a fantastic option in a lot of scenarios. Really good in Brawl, really good at defending in heist, and overall a good soft counter to a lot of tankier brawlers. Sprout can be fantastic, especially in knockout and bounty. Does suffer to a lot of aggressive combinations, but overall pretty strong. And then finally we have Pam. So Pam, very underrated right now, so good in hot zone, really good in a lot of gem grab maps, and across the board a good Pam player, can absolutely pop off, especially since the new mythic gear as well. It's really helped her in the meta. Now we're moving on to the 80s, starting off with Belle. So Belle, I think, is the best of the bunch in terms of the 80, just because she's so consistent across the board. Really good as a mid in heist. I pretty much use her everywhere, any single open map, and a lot of hot zone maps as well. She gets so much value, and just a really strong brawler across the board right now. Really do enjoy Belle in this meta. B is still a fantastic option a lot of times. The Rattled Hive gadget is actually showing her a little bit more love. I think without it, she'd probably be near the B tier, but really good for pressure, and just overall so many tanks, she can still shut them down pretty easily. Rosa recently received a buff to her tank trait. Well, she got a new tank trait, which really allowed her to cycle the supers a lot more. And especially once you have super as well, she's basically unkillable, especially with the 4 gloves combination. She's being used a lot of competitive right now, and a very strong option in the meta. Brock, I would say, is a pretty underrated brawler when it comes down to when I'm playing Power League. People don't tend to ban him out. He's very solid, really good in heist, good in bounty, and really good in knockout as well. So super strong in free game modes. Barley is a very strong option, so underrated when it comes down to the casual play base. Pros value Barley as one of the best brawlers in the game for sure. Even in knockout, he can really thrive once the gas closes in with his healing gadget, and just overall heist Brawl. There's so many scenarios where Barley is really good. Ems is a fantastic option. Within monthly finals, before the balance changes, she was actually picked, I think, like the 7th most out of everyone, picked and banned the 7th most, and also just really picked in ESL recently as well. Main reason being she's super versatile, really good against those tankier options, and still, even if she faces off against her counters, she has really good value with the speed gear and just decent HP as well. Nita the same as Ems, really probably a bit of a better counter against meta brawlers like Tara, for example, and also she's a fantastic counter to a lot of the sharpshooters as well. So even though they can keep the distance, when she gets a bear, she can then push up and get a lot of pressure. Of course, really good in heist. Shelly, she's actually like an S tier brawler when you compare the data. You know, me personally, I'll put her towards the A tier, maybe even B tier, but pros still value Shelly a lot, especially because she's still super fast in the grass with her speed gear, and overall really good when it comes down to defending, really good in terms of pressure once she gets her super. And of course, Clay Pigeons is actually really broken right now. Eve, I think, is a super fantastic brawler across the board. You can never go wrong with going to Eve when it comes down to knockout, when it comes down to any kind of watery map like Safe Zone, for example. She's just so good in every scenario. Artie is really underrated a lot of the times, I think, especially when you're thinking of any passive map in combination with any sharpshooter or just any brawler. Really, you're going to get a lot of damage onto one brawler, especially excels when it comes down to bounty and knockout. Ash, I feel like I probably overrated him a little bit in the A tier, probably fair to be in the B tier, but I still feel like in the right hands, Ash can absolutely pop off. And the good thing about Ash is one of the few tanks that can actually counter his counters, especially since the rats are so good at doing that. Bruffs as well has started to fall off a little bit in the meta, but I think at the bottom of 80 is pretty fair, just because he still gets a lot of value in a lot of different scenarios. Probably a lot better in terms of the gem grab and also the Brawl meta. Not really used too much outside of that, but I still think is a solid option right now in the meta. Mr. P is starting to fall down a little bit. His use rate and pick rate, well, his use rate and also ban rate wasn't really the best in the ESL recently, but I still think it's a very solid option. You just can't pick him early on in a draft because he gets countered pretty easily. but still really good in knockout, bounty, any passive map. You're going to get a lot of value out of Mr. P. Poco's still pretty solid across the board, really good in gem grab and Brawl Ball, and Hot Zone in particular. And of course, Tick, he's literally the best throw when it comes down to bounty and knockout. Literally, you can't lose if you have a Tick on your team. So now we're moving on to the S tier, starting off with Gray. So Gray right now, I think is near the high A tier or low S tier. I think in the right hands, he can absolutely pop off. He's really strong with the walking cane gadget right now. Counters throws really well when it comes down to knockout and bounty. Can be really good on unbreakable wall maps as well, because of course that's where typically throws are really strong at. And of course he's a pop-off brawler. If you can connect gadgets, connect supers, you're going to make a big difference in the meta. Gus, I feel like it's starting to drop down in play rates a little bit, because people are starting to realize that if you early pick a Gus, you can go a lot of high HP brawlers and Gus can't deal with it. But I still feel like he's an S tier brawler, mainly because he's so strong in bounty and knockout, really good in hot zone as well, combining your super with your teammates. He's still really strong. Kooky Popper is the main reason why he's still in the S tier. Stu, I feel like is a brawler which is so solid across the board, and people still underrate him a lot. You can pretty much go him everywhere. Hot zone is probably the best brawler there. He can be pretty good in maps like Pit Stop as a good kind of mid brawler to stop any kind of tanks, or I don't know, any kind of brawler in the middle. He's really strong in Pit Stop, and just across the board really strong. Carl is a fantastic option in the right hands. He's a fantastic last pick. I feel like you always got to worry about Carl if you draft him, but not only that, you can just pretty much go him into everything. Of course, the only downside to him is that there's glaring weaknesses with him, and the fact that it's pretty easy to counter, but still, if you get value out of your flying hook and protective pirouette, you're going to be able to make a big difference. And he's super versatile. You can use him everywhere. Tara is one of the best brawlers in the game easily right now. Her pets just make for so much pressure, especially against single shot brawlers. But not only that, you've seen her in game modes and maps which you typically wouldn't really see her in before, even when she was really strong. You know, I'm thinking like Open Zone. I've seen her used sometimes. I've seen her used in Kaboom Canyon, where she can be really strong. I just think Tara is an amazing brawler right now. Counters so many of the meta brawlers. Bonnie, I think, is the third best brawler in the game right now. I just can't express how strong she is. She's one of the most picked and banned brawlers in ESL at the moment. So good when it comes down to heist. So good at literally every single scenario. I think the only thing she struggles with, of course, is dealing with tanks, but still, I feel like I can get away with it, Bonnie, because at least they charge her super up. Crow, I think, is the second best brawler in the game right now, which is actually weird, because the funny thing about Crow is that he received a nerf, but if anything, he's actually got better within the meta. He was actually one of the most banned out brawlers when it comes down to ESL, and also he's just super toxic, super versatile. I just think he needs a nerf to kill him pretty soon. And then finally, moving on to the best brawler in the game, we have Squeak. So Squeak, if you didn't know, chain reaction was buffed by 10% a couple of months ago, and it just made him so incredibly strong. Of course, Squeak can still be countered by some aggro brawlers, but he just fares off against them a lot better than he used to. Of course, Residue as well for 10 seconds is super toxic. I don't think there's a glaringly OP or broken brawler in the meta right now. Every brawler is just, well, the S tier brawlers are pretty strong, but more often than not, there's counters to them. So it's a pretty healthy meta, if I say so myself. But I think Squeak is quite obviously the best brawlers, and then there's just a lot of other brawlers in the S tier. But let me know what you think of my tier list. You can see it on the screen right here. Thought I'd go through it pretty quick, giving you guys my quick and honest opinion on how I think the meta is right now. But of course, we have balance changes pretty soon, so it's probably going to change, but at least you guys get to see how it is right now. But that's going to be it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.